Every town has its stories. The ones passed around campfires, whispered in the hallways of abandoned buildings, and buried in police reports that were never meant to be found. Some say they're myths, others call them legends. But what happens when these stories start following you home? What's up, everybody? My name is Bradyn, and welcome to our brand new podcast, the Specter Files. A podcast dedicated to the unexplained, the unknown, the forgotten, and the things that refuse to stay dead. Together, we're diving into haunted locations, paranormal encounters, cryptid sightings, urban legends, and real stories from people who swear they experienced something from the other side. In this first episode, I'm opening the door into what this show is truly about. Why people chase the unexplained. Why people investigate. What lives in the corners of abandoned buildings. And why some encounters leave permanent scars. Whatever side of this field you're on, whether you're a skeptic, or you're a believer, or you're somewhere in between, you are now part of the investigation. So join me, turn the lights down, lock your doors, and whatever you hear, keep on listening. Now, I have always considered myself a paranormal enthusiast. I grew up researching haunted locations and going on ghost tours. I watched the shows that everybody knows. And I found interest, a big interest, in all things weird and unexplained. Growing up in Charleston, Illinois, there are a few spots that are considered well known. Airtight Bridge, where in October of 1980 a woman was found on the banks of the Imbra River, missing her hands, her legs, and her head. St. Omer Cemetery, where a supposed witch named Caroline is laid to rest next to her family. Pemberton Hall, on the campus of Eastern Illinois University, where a woman was supposedly killed by a janitor with a mop after he found her playing the piano in the attic when no one was supposed to be on campus. And finally, Ashmore Estates, the old poor farm turned psychiatric hospital. I think everyone has a moment where logic stops and your brain can't compute as to why. For me, that moment happened long ago when I was just a child, but there are two instances that stick out above the rest. On March 3rd of 2017, my grandfather, Ronald Wambach, passed away. He lived in Wisconsin, and naturally, a few weeks after his death, we headed up to Wisconsin for his funeral. I had the opportunity to sing at his funeral with my little sister, and it was probably the worst rendition of Amazing Grace you have ever heard in your entire life. I remember going up before we sang, and I looked at my sister and I said, "If you need anything, just squeeze my hand." And we both broke down in the middle of singing, stopped the song and everything, to the point where the entire family ran up to us and we all just started hugging. Eventually, we all composed ourselves and we were able to continue. And as we finished the song, two emergency exits with no handles on the outside, on the sides of the church, both flew open. I looked at my sister, and I told her that was him. That was him going. The second one took place in 2022, and it took place inside one of Coles County's most well-known and haunted locations, Ashmore Estates. But before we tell you that story, I think it's best to go over a little bit of history on the old poor farm. From 1857 until 1869, the Coles County Poor Farm sat in the Charleston, Illinois township, near the small town of Loxa. In 1870, the county purchased 260 acres from an A.N. Graham in Section 35 of the Ashmore Township for a new farm. That new farm sat aside the Indianapolis and St. Louis railroads. It was a small timber and brick building constructed by H.B. Truman, and that was the first building to sit on the property. It was 38 by 58 feet, 2 stories tall, and had an attached kitchen. Many residents, or inmates as they were called, died at the farm. The county maintained a small cemetery somewhere north on the grounds. In 1879, Joshua Ricketts, superintendent of the county farm at the time, had recorded 32 deaths of the roughly 250 inmates who stayed at the farm, and that was between 1870 and 1879. Another pauper cemetery, which still exists today, sits just south of Route 16 and contains the graves between 60 to 100 persons. The Board of State Commissioners visited the poor farm in 1902, and as for the condition of the mentally ill at the farm, they wrote, "There is no special provision for the insane. None are locked up or in restraint." By 1911, the Auxiliary Committee of the State Board of Charities condemned the almshouse for its vermin-infected walls, rough floors, small windows, and improper ventilation. It was reported that flies swarmed everywhere and were especially noticeable on the poor food prepared for dinner. In January of 1915, the Almshouse Committee received bids for the construction of a new fireproof building. The building contract for the new almshouse was granted to a J.W. Montgomery in March for $20,389. The cornerstone was ceremoniously laid on May 17, 1916, and a full-time caretaker and his family took turns living in the almshouse and a white farmhouse that was still on the grounds. Coles County sold the almshouse to Ashmore Estates Incorporated in February of 1959. That corporation opened the building as a private psychiatric hospital by the same name. In October of 1964, after only 5 years in operation, the psychiatric hospital closed down because of debt. The institution reopened in 1965, only for its focus to be changed again. This time, it went from a private psychiatric facility to one that accepted patients from state mental institutions. By 1968, the shelter care facility housed 49 residents, including 10 affected with epilepsy. Paul Swinford and Galen Martini purchased the building in July of 1976. They invested over $200,000 in the construction of a modern addition onto the old building. Construction began in 1977, but was not completed until the 1980s. Once the addition of Ashmore Estates had been completed and the rest of the building was brought up to code, the facility reopened again, and its future appeared brighter than ever before. In February of 1986, Swinford entered into a limited partnership with a Peoria-based company known as Convalescent Management Associates Incorporated to help manage the institution's financial expenses. The Departments of Public Aid and Public Health dragged their feet for over a year over the issuance of proper licenses and certificates, leading Swinford to file for permission from the Illinois Health Facility Planning Board to close the facility. At that time, Ashmore Estates' financial losses exceeded $1.5 million. By the end of April, all the residents had been transferred into area homes, and Ashmore Estates closed its doors. From April of 1986 to 1998, Ashmore Estates sat abandoned. However, in 1998, a resident of Sullivan purchased the property for $12,500 and announced that he planned to renovate the building and turn it into his home. However, continuous vandalism prevented him from ever realizing that dream. Then, in August of 2006, Scott Kelly purchased Ashmore Estates from Arthur Colclasher and began renovating. To finance the project, the Kellys offered flashlight tours of the interior. To discourage trespassers, they erected signs and moved onto the property. They then opened a haunted house attraction in October of 2006, and during the off-season, Kelly offered overnight stays in the building. However, in January of 2013, Ashmore Estates was hit by a horrible storm, and wind speeds during that storm reached up to 100 miles per hour. Ashmore Estates suffered heavy damage, its roof was blown off, and its support gables were destroyed. Shortly thereafter, new owners took over the property and made plans to restore the building to its former glory. On May 3rd of 2014, Ashmore Estates came under new ownership and is now owned by Robin and Nora Terry and Ashley Burgoon. During their first few weeks of ownership, there were huge strides to clean up the property and restore Ashmore Estates. Robin is quoted as saying, "I was walking through the location, and it just felt like something was saying, 'Help our home.'" And that's exactly what he did. Since purchasing, they have had countless events, investigators, and celebrities in the paranormal world come out to investigate Ashmore Estates. Many of them claiming to have paranormal experiences. And that is where our story begins. It was November 14th, 2022. I had only been investigating in the paranormal for a couple of months, and this was my second time at Ashmore. Around midnight, some members of my team, finding the Specter, and I decided to do an Estes method on the 3rd floor. Almost every single member of my team had commented periodically throughout the night about how weird the building felt. The first time we were in Ashmore, the building felt very, very happy and felt like it was a party. However, this time, it felt very dark, it felt very aggressive, and it felt like something or someone did not want us there. Now, me being the amateur investigator I was, I decided to call out whatever this aggressive spirit was right before I went into Estes. The session started off as normal. Unclear responses. The responses that we did get did not line up with anything. And then, it changed. Responses suddenly became more clear, and it seemed like every single response we were getting was lining up to a question. Simultaneously with getting these responses on the spirit box during Estes, the 3rd floor suddenly began to change. It felt like a dark, ominous cloud had gotten into the building and was just over our heads, and we were just sitting there like waiting ducks for whatever was going to happen. As this dark, ominous feeling began to take over the 3rd floor, I began to feel like something or someone was standing behind me. Now, me being the amateur investigator that I was, I decided to call out whatever this aggressive spirit was right before I went into Estes. Whatever was there with us made itself known that it was there, and it wasn't playing any games. As we were nearing the middle of our session, I began to feel pressure on my shoulders, like somebody had just placed their hands there. I instinctively tore the headphones off and looked behind me, only to be surprised that nobody was standing there, and the rest of the team was exactly where they were when the session started at the other end of the building. I remember commenting on how weird that was, how odd I felt. I told the team to try and make contact with whoever was down at the end of the hall with me. I put the headphones back on and continued the session. And what happened next changed the way I view the paranormal and the way that I investigate.
Is someone touching Brady down there?
Which side?
Either
Fuck
side.
you.
Hey, that's not very nice. We're friends here.
The next thing I remember was being in the team room with all of our gear. But the series of events was explained to me by the team, so I will do my best to recall it to you as they did for me. The responses during Estes when I went back under got very, very dark. Responses telling us to get the fuck out, that we were not welcome, calling us every single name in the book. And when the team asked what this aggressive spirit wanted, it said one word: him. Now I can only assume that this spirit was talking about me, however, to this day, I don't know. After that response, the team decided that we were done doing the Estes method, and they came down the hall and took me out. And according to the team, I was coherently answering every question and comment and carrying on a full conversation, even though I remember none of it. As the team started back down towards the stairs to go take a break in the team room, I stayed behind. And I sat back in that rocking chair. And it wasn't until they got to the stairs that they realized that I wasn't behind them. They turned around and saw me sitting in the rocking chair, and they asked what I was doing. And according to them, all that I said was, "I'm gonna wait here. I want to watch what happens next." Dave and Tristan, wanting no part of what happens next, firemen carried me out of that chair, down 4 flights of stairs, and into the team room, where I eventually came to. And I remember asking what happened with the session, and everyone just kind of stayed silent. Nobody would answer, until eventually they told me the events as I have just told them to you. Now, since that night, I have been back to Ashmore Estates numerous times. In fact, I work there now as a tour guide, giving tours to investigators and helping out with their investigations. And never, not once, have I felt that building more off than I did that cold night in November. I don't believe it was anything evil or demonic or anything like that. Personally, I believe that it was just an asshole spirit who wanted to mess with a group of new investigators and scare us. And that he did. It scared me to the point where I did not go out and investigate for a few weeks after that incident. Many people communicate for different reasons, but it all circles back to one thing: feeling that connection. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Bradyn, and this has been episode 1 of the Specter Files. If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to leave a like and a comment, and subscribe to the Finding the Spectre YouTube page, because this is where we will post all of our podcasts, and I'll see you next time, if you dare.